The 2004 World Enduro Championship got underway in mid-March in the south of Spain. The location was the town of Puerto Lumbreras in the heart of the Murcia region, about half an hour inland from the Mediterranean coast. This is a semi-desert area, but irrigation and other agricultural developments have made it famous for the cultivation of fruit and vegetables. Sadly, instead of celebrations to start the season, the mood was one of compassion and emotion. All of Spain was shrouded in mourning after the terrorist attacks that killed hundreds of train passengers in Madrid only 2 days before the event. For 2004, there's a new image for the Enduro Championship, and leading title contender Australia's Stefan Merriman was typical of the riders welcoming the professional approach.
Yeah, it feels like we're in Formula 1 GP or something, but no, it's very good for the sport because it needed something like this. So, yeah, everything's perfect so far.
Each day of the weekend competition now counts as a point-scoring round in its own right. And to streamline the system, there are now just 3 categories of World Enduro Championship competition, instead of the 5 classes of previous years. Enduro 1 is for 125cc 2-strokes and 250cc 4-strokes. They may be very different types of machine, but they're very similar in terms of their effectiveness in competition. Each day's route of the Spanish Enduro GP was 45 kilometers long and included 2 motocross tests and 1 Enduro special stage. The special stages were fast and seemed to favour the bigger 4-strokes. The link sections between stages had some heavy going in store for the riders, and on these the 2-strokes looked like they had the edge. Marc Germain, representing Yamaha Motor France, didn't get off to the start of his dreams in Enduro 1. After a great 3rd place in the 125cc 2-stroke category last year, Marc had set his sights on the Enduro podiums this season. But Spain just didn't seem to suit him, since he wound up in 14th place in the class, more than 3 minutes behind the winner. The leading French Enduro 1 rider in Spain was in fact Fabien Planet in 11th place, right behind Peter Bergvall of Sweden. We were hoping for a better result from the Swede in this category. Previously 2-time world champion in the 250 4-stroke category, Bergvall has switched from Yamaha to Husqvarna from 2004. But on the first day of the new season, he ended up more than 2 minutes behind the leader. Riding for the Farioli KTM team on a 125 2-stroke machine, the Portuguese rider Helder Rodrigues set 9th fastest time in the class. It was a good start to the season, only 1 week before his home Grand Prix. Xavi Puigdemont should have felt right at home in Spain, but the rider from the Catalan region would surely have wanted to do better than 8th place at 1 minute 52 seconds behind the winner. Sixth place went to the fastest representative of the Italian manufacturer TM, Sweden's Richard Larsson. TM's Italian stallion Alessandro Bellamotti was 5th on the day, right behind his countryman, Honda's Simone Albagoni. While the 3rd step on the podium went to a young Polish rider, Bartosz Obluki, already showing terrific form in his debut season.
Last season I knew that I can do very well. I just had some technical problem with the team and some bad luck last year, but I knew that I can make very well, so now I get good bike and I can go fast.
Petteri Silvan is obviously going for the title in this category. The rider from Finland was 2nd in Spain, although beaten by the substantial margin of 53 seconds by the winner, Australia's Stefan Merriman. It came as no surprise to see Merriman on the top step of the podium. He's already established himself as one of the best off-road riders in the world and adapted quickly to his new mount for 2004.
Four-stroke from two-stroke, so I've been training a lot and trying to learn different technique for riding because, you know, the four-stroke is so different. But I like a lot. It's very nice to ride and easy to ride because it's not much power, you know, not a lot of power, so it's very easy to ride.
So that was the first podium trio of 2004. Stefan Merriman from Petteri Silvan and Bartosz Obluki. Enduro 2 is for 250cc two-strokes or 450cc four-strokes, and KTM have contenders of both types. But it was a dark day for KTM France in this opening event of the season when the team lost its leader, Freddy Blanc. He went down hard on one of the link-up sections and ended up with a fractured patella. The resultant surgery would keep him out of action for a good part of the season. Things looked somewhat rosier for the Italian rider Giovanni Sala, who proved that even at 40-something you can still shine. The five-time world champion finished more than 2 minutes behind the leader, but still made the Enduro 2 top 10 in 9th spot. Sweden's Andreas Torresson gave Husseberg an 8th place, while 7th went to a Honda, that of the Finnish rider Petteri Salonen. 6th was taken by the fastest and only official Husqvarna rider in the class, another Finn, Mika Serenkoski. At the last minute, Petri Pojamo decided to leave Enduro 1 for the Enduro 2 class in 2004. The reigning 125cc two-stroke world champion pulled off an encouraging 5th place, even though he's still suffering from an injured leg. Paul Edmondson may have 3 world titles under his belt, but he still wants to win another. The Brit came home in a solid 4th place. 3rd was the Italian Alessandro Botturi, who swapped the jersey of the Italian pro rugby team Brescia for the orange riding suit of the KTM Farioli team. Last year, Arno Villanova was 3rd in the Spanish national Enduro standings and emphasised his potential with a fine 2nd place in the opening event of his 2004 World Championship Challenge. But it was the favourite, Juha Salminen, who started off this year just like he ended the previous one. The Finnish rider from KTM Racing will be a tough one to beat in 2004. For round number 1, he pulled off the win with a 53-second lead over Villanova.
I was lucky and everybody else was lucky that rain, in the morning rained a little bit, otherwise the dust is a big problem. But overall my day was quite easy, just driving and try to finish safety and small crash in 3rd lap. Some problem with the thumb, the finger is still a problem, and just driving safety and easy, that not mistakes.
In the paddock, rumour has it that this is Salminen's last year on the world circuit. In 2005 and 2006, he should be signing up for the Grand National Cross Country Championship in the USA. But regardless of this, he's still looking to wipe out all competition in Enduro 2 this season. The Spanish company Gas had hoped to do well in Enduro 3, the class for two-strokes from 290 to 500cc and four-strokes from 500 to 650cc. But both of its team riders, Jai Laaksonen of Finland and Frenchman Sébastien Guillaume, had to call it quits. The French rider injured his ankle and had to deal with the pain all day long, while the Finn had machine problems. 8th place on the first day went to the Swede, Niklas Gustafsson, just ahead of his fellow countryman Bjorn Karlsson, seen here on his Husseberg. Last year's big class champion was another Swede, Anders Eriksson, but he was somewhat in the wings all day long in Spain. The Husqvarna leader did make it into 6th place, but was a minute and a half behind the leader. Just in front of Eriksson was his teammate, Mika Ahola. Considered one of the true revelations of last season, the Husseberg rider Marco Takala showed everyone his desire to win in 2004, taking 4th place, albeit 1 minute 19 seconds down on the class winner. In Enduro 3, KTM Racing is betting on Samuli Aro. He took the 2002 World Championship with a 250cc two-stroke and obviously has what it takes to bring his huge 525 four-stroke into the limelight. In the Spanish opener, he finished in third place, with second spot swiped from right under his nose in the last few metres of the race by the British rider David Knight. The He-Man from the Isle of Man is known as Enduro's Bigfoot, with his size 14 riding boots, and was just 46 seconds from the winner.
You know, I had pretty good, comfortable second position most of the day, and then Arrow started to close every special 1 or 2 seconds, and made for a good fight in the finish of the race. So, yeah, really happy. Hopefully, I can make podium tomorrow again, and then try and work up to winning some race for the middle of the season.
They call Ivan Cervantes El Rey in Spanish enduro circles, and he was certainly king of the hill on the first day of the 2004 competition in Spain. It was the first Grand Prix win for the Spaniard, but at only 21 years old, he has the determination and the potential to beat some of the more experienced WEC talent. Cervantes had already surprised people by beating Juha Salminen at the Spanish Championship round last year. And after his 2003 revelation, this is obviously now the time for confirmation of his abilities. Cervantes set the fastest time for all 3 categories on the opening day of 2004. Another Spanish rider enjoying success is Nani Roma, the first Spaniard to win the famous Paris-Dakar race across the Sahara. He's competing in World Enduro mainly to keep on top form for rally raid racing, but he still takes 13th place. Spain is home to famous off-road and trials bike manufacturers such as Bultaco and GasGas. In fact, GasGas has more than a 50% share of the worldwide trials market, and its enduro share is climbing fast. Today, GasGas sells more than 8,000 enduro bikes a year. The Spanish manufacturer wants to build a cosmopolitan reputation and has 3 riders from Finland, plus 1 Frenchman and a Belgian. In addition, GasGas has always promoted the new guys in town, choosing rookies and helping them unveil their talents in actual competition. Paul Edmondson was one such rider, and today it is Petri Pajamo who GasGas see as having championship potential. Day 2 of the race, and just like the previous day, the competitors got off to a wet start. The rain hung on all day, so the organisers reduced the circuit to 3 rather than 4 laps. Former champion Peter Bergvall was still not on his usual pace, but did a little better than on day 1 and ended up 8th. In 7th position was Marc Germain. He was the best French scorer out there in any of the categories. Italian rider Alessandro Bellamotti, a member of the KTM Farioli team, was looking good in 6th place, while Poland's Bartosz Obluki misses the podium in race 2, but still stayed close to the championship leaders by coming in 5th. Roberto Bazzuri looks like the man to beat from the Italian-based Husqvarna team and took 4th, a little more than 1 minute behind the leader. In 3rd, 1 step lower on the podium than the day before, we find the Finnish rider Petteri Silman. He's one of the rare 125 two-stroke riders to cause problems for the very popular 250 four-stroke Yamahas in this class. Second on the day almost seems like a bad result for Stefan Merriman. That's how much we're used to seeing him in the winner's spot. The UFO Yamaha star fell twice in the special stages, but still finished only 16 seconds behind Simone Albagoni, the Italian rider from Honda's HM Zanardo team, who pulled off the win in Enduro 1. Moving on to Enduro 2, 8th place was taken by New Zealander Paul Wilby. The Kiwis riding a 250cc two-stroke Honda for Paul Edmondson's team, Fast Eddie Racing. In the mud and constant rain, Mika Sarankowski on the Husqvarna was quicker than Wilby. He finished 7th, around 2 minutes behind the winner, but close behind 6th place man, the Italian veteran Giovanni Sala. Sala's KTM teammate Alessandro Botturi finished in 5th, while Honda-mounted Paul Edmondson finished 4th and top British rider in the class. In third, and very much a challenger for the World Enduro 2 title, was the Finn Petri Pojamo of the Gas team. It was a wonderful way to come back to competition after a 4-month layoff due to injury. Second race of the season, and it was another fine second place for Arno Villanova in his World Championship debut weekend. But Finnish rider Juha Salminen went 1, no make that 2 better. He ended the race over a minute quicker than the young Spaniard to take a double first for the weekend and obviously lead the class point standings.
Yeah, it was good. It was actually really good. Yesterday was some difficulties, some crash, but today without any big problems, and it was a good day.
In the big Enduro 3 class, it was Finnish gas rider Jani Ladssonen in 8th place, behind Sweden's Eriksson.
It's a good race. The rain doesn't affect the race, and it's a good race today. For me, it's a little bit better today, and we push.
Conditions you enjoy?
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay.
While the battle for second and third was again a dogfight between Samuli Aro and David Knight. This time the Finn got the upper hand, finishing 25 seconds ahead of the Manxman. This looks like a battle that will go on all season. And on the top of the Day 2 podium, it was still the Day 1 winner. Series new boy Ivan Cervantes has a smooth and calm approach to his racing, but this young man can really turn it on. His winter preparation is seriously bearing fruit, and this homegrown talent was undoubtedly the star of the Spanish GP. His double win saw him at the top of the class as the Enduro circus set out to move on to Portugal. Cervantes received justified adulation from the 15,000 fans present at the Grand Prix of Spain. In the Enduro 3 standings, he was already 8 points ahead of Aro and Knight, with Tarkala 14 points adrift in 4th. Despite the weather, the Spanish event was a good start to the 2004 World Enduro Championship, with the top riders quickly adjusting to the new categories. Stefan Merriman, Juha Salminen and Ivan Cervantes were the pace setters, but there was plenty of opposition aiming to give them a hard time as the season got rolling. For the second round of the series, the World Enduro Championship moved to the north of Portugal and the city of Guimarães. This is an important regional centre with a population nearing 150,000 inhabitants, and its architecture displays a mix of modernity and tradition. Plenty of evidence of medieval Portugal can still be found in its fortified historic district and city squares. The Guimarães region is located between Porto and the Spanish border. The surrounding countryside with its steep paths and the pervading aroma of its eucalyptus trees is a dream locale for off-road motorcycling. In late March 2004, it hosted the 110 best enduro riders in the world, ready to tackle a lap of 51 kilometres that would be covered 3 times each day. The lap contained 4 special stages, with one of these being rated as extreme. Obviously, the Portuguese crowd was all behind one man, Helder Rodrigues. The 25-year-old KTM rider won the 125 class at the 2003 International 6 Days Enduro in Brazil and is the standard bearer for Portuguese enduro racing. Despite a flourishing national championship, Portuguese riders do not often compete beyond their own borders. For 2 years, Helder has been the lone WEC contestant from Portugal, but in that time has established himself as a genuine candidate for the Enduro 1 title. Despite all his efforts, however, the Portuguese rider was not able to live up to the expectations of his fans on day 1. After the day's 10 timed sections, he found himself in 7th place, 1 minute and 22 seconds behind the leader. Finland's Petteri Silvan posted the best time in the Extreme Special, but was far too inconsistent at the start of the day. In Spain the previous week, he finished on the podium on each of the 2 days. In Portugal, the Finn could only manage 6th place after the first round action. Richard Larsson is the man that the Italian constructor TM is pinning all their hopes on this season, and the Swedish rider fought all day for a podium result. His efforts seemed likely to be rewarded until the final motocross special test of the day. Larsson could do no better than 15th in this test and had to settle for a rather disappointing 5th on the day. The Enduro 1 category is probably the most hotly contested class in the WEC as far as podium positions is concerned, and this is how it played out on the first day in Portugal. Well in contention was Poland's Bartosz Obluki. He finished 4th and would most likely have made the podium apart from a slow start to the day when he lost 6 seconds to the leaders on the first special stage. Third on the day was Marc Germain. This was the first podium for a French rider in the 2004 season. Unfortunately, France's highest-placed finisher will not be continuing on the WE Series as the World Championship is not part of Yamaha France's plans. The National Championship is the team's priority. Simone Albergoni has the full support of Italy's HM Zanardo team, however, and repaid that commitment in Portugal as he took 2nd place in Enduro 1. Albergoni, Germain, Obluki and Larsson, the 4 men separated by just 8 seconds. Simone Albergoni has all the expectations of the Italian fans on his shoulders, who still search for the new star after the golden era of Gio Sala and Mario Rinaldi. The Italian media have dubbed Simone the little prince of Italian enduro racing, the title that suits him fine, even though he's still very much in the shadow of an even more compact rider, the king of enduro, Stefan Merriman. It was quite frankly impossible to beat the Australian on the first day in Portugal. From the 10 special stages, he clocked the best time in 7 of them. This was despite several falls in both the tests and on the liaison sections. Falls or not, he put in times much quicker than the competition, sometimes as many as 10 seconds faster than the next man on a single stage. Merriman ended the day 40 seconds ahead of Albergoni and a further 3 seconds clear of Germain. Even in the heart of the Portuguese countryside, one cannot get around the rules of the WEC. New Zealand rider Paul Wilby found this out when he was disqualified from the Enduro 2 competition for receiving unauthorised assistance on one of the hill climbs. His boss and teammate in the Fast Eddie racing team, Paul Edmondson, knows the rules like the back of his hand, and he had no such problem. And he didn't have any particular problem with the climbs either, although a few minor difficulties in the second Enduro test did cost him 10 seconds. He finished the day in 5th place. Mika Sarenkoski in the background was 4th in Enduro 2, where we remind you that 252 strokes and the 454 strokes race together. The riders in Enduro 2 class had the task of running first on the track all weekend long, because the WEC has established a sensible rule whereby the starting order of the classes changes for each round. Arno Villanova starred in Spain with 2 podium results, but very few thought he had a chance to repeat that kind of performance outside the borders of his home country. The Catalan silenced the detractors with a strong 3rd place in the class. The number 2 was Alessandro Botturi's number when he played for the Brescia Rugby Club, and it was also his finishing spot on Saturday. The Italian rider was runner-up in the day's stages with impressive regularity, clocking the 2nd best time on no less than 6 of them. When it comes to regularity, however, no one could do better than Juha Salminen. Not only was the Finn an easy Enduro 2 winner on the day, but he also set a WEC record by winning all 10 special stages. Enduro 3's the category for the biggest displacements for both the 2- and 4-stroke engine types. In a continuation of the Spanish results, the Finnish rider from the Husaberg team, Marko Tarkala, was 5th in the class. Fourth-placed Finn Samuli Aro was the big loser of the day after stalling his big KTM. The bike's electric starter had been removed to reduce weight, and the Finn had to spend quite a while trying to get the bike going with the kickstarter. Aro persisted and eventually got going, but he lost 20 seconds in this stage alone and saw any chance of victory disappear. A third Finn in the top 6 was Husqvarna's Mika Ahola. He gave the Italian constructor their first podium result of the season after taking advantage of Aro's misfortunes. And Aro was only 16 seconds off the winner's pace. Even closer and second on the opening day in Portugal was David Knight. The Englishman showed some impressive skills in the specials, particularly the ease with which he conquered the tricky surfaces on many of the hill climbs. Look closely at the riding lesson he gives his rivals on this rocky stage. There were those who thought that the motocross portion of the previous Spanish event had been laid out specifically to suit the skills of Ivan Cervantes and give him an unfair advantage. On this very difficult Portuguese terrain, he showed that his skills are wide-ranging and that he doesn't need any outside help. Not only that, he revealed the depth of his dedication and training routines. Ivan had worked very specifically on his hill climbing techniques, riding in quiet secrecy on specially laid out sections near his home. And the results were there for all to see. Another rider who works hard on constantly improving his technique is Stefan Merriman. He originally came from Australia to ride a Husqvarna in the WEC and then switched to Honda for 2003. In that year's international 6 days enduro, he was the only rider to consistently challenge the overall winner, the 7-time world motocross champion and Yamaha rider Stefan Everts. Almost certainly that's why Merriman is now riding one of the blue Yamaha WR250 4-strokes in Enduro 1. He's a favourite for the world title, but still reckons that he can improve his riding technique. Initially, Stefan was a trials rider, but you can't ride standing on the foot pegs all day long without getting exhausted. So Stefan is still working on a more motocross style of riding, sitting down more in the turns. He reckons that it pays off in terms of control in certain situations.
Yeah, in the beginning, because I come from trials and I was always used to standing up everywhere, just never sit down. To sit down feel very uncomfortable for me, so I started just like this, and then many times crash. Standing up, I crash all the time, because when you sit down, you can put the foot and save it and maybe recover. So over the years, you know, the last few years training, I've tried to learn to sit a lot more with the ruts and learn to sit. It's better, you know, a lot of the time in the corner, but it's difficult for me, and getting better and better at it.
Former world champion Peter Bergvall rode a Yamaha last year, but has switched to Husqvarna for 2004. He's still getting used to the new bike, but took a solid 8th place in Enduro 1 on that second day in Portugal. Seventh was TM's Italian rider Alessio Paoli, despite eating some dirt en route. Just ahead of him was his Swedish teammate Richard Larsson, while Portuguese favourite Helder Rodrigues delighted the local crowds by moving up 2 places to 5th. The young Polish Yamaha team rider Bartosz Obluki kept himself in contention among the championship leaders by finishing 4th. But it was his close rival, the young Honda-mounted Italian Simone Albergoni, who pushed him out of a place on the podium. Second, ahead of Albergoni, was Petteri Silvan, but once again they all had to give best to Stefan Merriman. The Australian led the championship standings after 2 rounds by 12 points from Albergoni. Then came Silvan, Obluki and Germain. New Zealander Paul Wilby had been disqualified from the Enduro 2 standings on day 1 for receiving unauthorised assistance, but he proved that he'd learned his lesson by taking his fast Eddie Honda to a fine 3rd place on the 2nd day. Ahead of Wilby was Spain's Arno Villanova, while third place went to Alessandro Batturi of the Italian KTM Farioli team. It was a good day for the Fast Eddie Honda squad, as team owner and former world champion Paul Edmondson took second place on the podium.
Obviously, I'm very happy. Really pleased to be on the podium. It's the first time this season, and I'm just happy because I've built a team and it's obviously working. So, you know, to be here at the World Championship and to be second position today, it's fantastic.
But on the top step, as usual, was the unstoppable Finn, Juha Salminen. Not surprisingly, this gave Salminen a comfortable 8-point lead in the championship table over Arno Villanova. Then came Batturi, Edmondson and Mika Sarenkoski. In the big bike wars of Enduro 3, it was another Mika, Husqvarna's Mika Ahola, who ended up 6th in Portugal on day 2. His teammate and another former world champion, Anders Eriksson, was just ahead of him. Rugged Manxman David Knight put in another solid ride to 4th place. He's riding a KTM 525 for the Cumbrian D3 racing team in 2004, having switched from Yamaha. The big KTM thumper certainly seems to suit his hard-riding style. Husaberg's main challenger for honours in 2004 is Marco Tarkala, and he kept up his challenge with a 3rd on day 2 in Portugal behind the KTM riders Samuli Aro and Ivan Cervantes. And after Portugal, it was Cervantes at the top of the points table, from Aro, Knight, Tarkala and Ahola.
I used to do something at home also when we got the babies, and then I said to my wife that, okay, I can cook the food, and that's the way that it came to my hobby, to cook.
Bacalhau, no?
Bacalhau, no.
You had good results today. It's time to open beer.
Yes. I already took 1 or 2, or I don't know. Yeah, but yeah, we will see later. Of course.
Originally a Swedish company and now Italian-owned, Husqvarna is today the leading manufacturer of off-road motorcycles in Italy. The company has just celebrated its 101st anniversary and has turned around a chaotic and contrasting history that has been split these last few years between economic difficulties and sporting success. For the first day of the competition, the weather couldn't have been better, with temperatures climbing into the mid-70s. It was a treat for riders and spectators alike. With the summer-like weather, the Italian fans were out in force to support their riders. And when needed, they pitched in with a helping hand on the more difficult sections, as we see here with Roberto Rota. For the top riders, the Matalika course offered no particular difficulties. There were very few climbs, a short liaison section, 3 cross tests and a special stage. Sweden's Peter Bergvall has been somewhat off the leading pace in the early events of the 2004 season. And this first day in the Italian Grand Prix saw more of the same for the two-time 250cc four-stroke world champion. He finished down in 10th place in the Enduro 1 class. On the technical side, Petteri Silvan is among the best riders in the world, but the rider from Finland had a somewhat disappointing first day, managing just a 5th place result. The official KTM team member suffered with his 125cc two-stroke in the very fast timed sections. On this day, they favoured the more powerful 250cc four-strokes with their higher top-end speed. For Mario Rinaldi, the Italian Grand Prix is a very personal affair. But despite all of his enthusiasm and skill, Super Mario came up just a bit short of the podium in 4th place. 4 seconds quicker was his Yamaha teammate, Bartosz Obluki. The young Polish rider has been a podium regular in WEC in 2004, 5 podium visits from 5 races so far. The UFO Corsa team had been the top team in Enduro 1 up to this point, and the only rider to spoil their party in Matalika was Italy's own Roberto Bazzuri from the Vito Consoloni Husqvarna team. At a fit and lively 40 years of age, he took 2nd place in the category. The Day 1 winner in the Enduro 1 category was Stefan Merriman. He was clearly in a class of his own, with a 1-minute 18-second margin of victory from Bazzuri. The Australian was particularly impressive on this special stage, putting in a time 12 seconds better than his nearest rival. Merriman's record on Day 1 was nothing short of exemplary, with 8 wins from 11 timed stages.
I'm just interested to win the class. It's all that UFO and also Yamaha are interested in, so I just try to win the class. The overall is just a bonus at the end. If you win it, you win it. If you don't, it doesn't matter.
Stefan Merriman's an old hand at finishing first. He made 4 times out of 5 races at this point of the season. For Roberto Bazzuri and his fan club, his effort was perhaps the signs of things to come. The starting order for the classes at each Enduro GP is mixed up round by round to keep things fair. In Italy, the Enduro 2 riders were the last to tackle the course. This meant that the tracks had already got well and truly rutted in some of the tougher areas. Paul Edmondson's Fast Eddie teammate, Paul Wilby, put in his best result of the season to date with a 4th place in class, 45 seconds off the class leader. Arno Villanova, the Catalan stonemason, had been flirting with podium finishes in Enduro 2 since the start of the season. He actually put in 3rd best time on Day 1 in Italy before being retrograded. The Honda rider was given a 2-minute penalty for passing a checkpoint too early. Regardless of this, he showed his natural talent, and with more race experience, he shouldn't have a problem in the future. The penalty for Villanova meant a promotion into the final podium spot for Alessandro Zani, the best result so far for the Italian in WEC 2004. Until just before the end of the day, Juha Salminen was the strongest rider in the category, and a 5th straight win was looking a sure bet. That was without taking into account the unexplainable mysteries of motorcycle racing. In the 3rd and last lap, some rocks got between the drive chain and the gearbox sprocket, causing the chain to break. This in turn damaged the clutch and ignition, and the world champion was forced to retire. Salminen's retirement left a number of riders as potential winners, beginning with Alessandro Botturi. The Italian former rugby player ended up second on the day, beaten by a mere 14 seconds by Paul Edmondson. Even though Botturi won 3 stages and Edmondson failed to put in a single best time, the Englishman's consistency won the day. His worst result was a 5th place in the special stage. Edmondson perfectly controlled his own race on the way to victory.
Obviously, I'm really pleased with the result today. I can't understand what was going on. Things were changing a lot, and it just seemed once Shuha was out of the question, then everybody was trying 100%.
This was the first rendition of God Save the Queen of the year, and it came for an unprecedented win, which proved that the smaller teams still have something to say about the outcome of the championship. After suffering with an injured ankle during the Spanish and Portuguese rounds, Sebastian Guillaume was back and ready for WEC Championship competition at Matalica. Nothing as yet to brag about, but a 6th place finish in Enduro 3 was encouraging for France's top rider in the World Championship. In fact, he could have won the day if he hadn't suffered an injured shoulder in the second half of the race. Marco Tarkola really flew in the morning, posting 5 best times, but a disappointing afternoon meant that he fell down the order to 5th place, more than a minute behind the eventual winner. The old Enduro king, Anders Ericsson, finally showed his talents in Italy as the Swede got off to a late start in 2004 in his quest for an 8th world title. For the first time this season, he challenged the lead trio of Aro, Knight and Cervantes. Ericsson finished 4th, but still on the same minute as the leaders. On the podium, it was still the same trio who seemed to have made it their own personal championship to this point in 2004. 3rd place on the big 525 KTM 4-stroke was the monster from the Isle of Man, David Knight, with his trademark aggressive riding style. Coming second was Ivan Cervantes, who used up more of his energy than he would have liked on the liaison section, where he was the first rider of the day into the stages. This was because the Enduro 3 class was chosen to start first in Italy. On this occasion, the Spanish flyer was beaten by a Finn coming back to top form. Samuli Aro was the top man in Enduro 3. He took best time in 4 of the 11 sections of the day, and after a slow start in Spain and Portugal, the Flying Finn is now at the peak of his form. For day 2 in Italy, the weather turned very much for the worse, with a veritable deluge falling on Metalica. It was like being at a completely different Grand Prix, as the course conditions had changed so dramatically. Despite their good handling and light weight, it's still possible to take some unwanted off-course excursions, as we see here with Gian Mattila in the heat of the battle. And it was even worse for the 4-stroke Yamaha of Italian rider Simone Tonelli, literally stuck in a rut, while all the time the penalty clock was running. In these conditions near the hill climb event, even Stefan Merriman was not on top form, and for the first time this season, his small size works against him. But the Australian limited his troubles and still posted a 5th place finish ahead of both Bazzuri and Obluki.
Hopefully we won't have too many more races that end up like this, because it was really pretty horrendous conditions.
The mud-filled race marked the return of Sweden's Peter Bergvall to the front runners. The Works Husqvarna rider missed out on a podium finish by only 7 seconds after some inconsistent times on the 1st and 3rd special stages. Simone Albergoni also made a better showing than the day before. He's considered to be the top Italian rider in the World Championship and took 3rd place, 57 seconds adrift of the leader. 2nd place was a bit of a surprise. Rikard Larsson from the relatively small TM factory team. The Swedish hopeful put in by far his best performance since the start of the 2004 WEC. Up until this event, Larsson had been riding in the shadows of fellow Swedes Peter Bergvall and Anders Eriksson. Petteri Silvan was the hero of the day in Enduro 1. With 6 special stages won, the Finn took his first win of the season by a 40-second margin over Larsson. In both Spain and Portugal, he'd complained about a lack of power from his bike. There were no complaints here.
Ancora inno nazionale finlandese.
After 3 events, Stefan Merriman led Petteri Silvan by 18 points. A comfortable margin, but it still didn't leave much room for error. The Enduro 2 riders were the last to pass through the special stages on this day and were riding in far from optimal conditions. This is Gio Sala finding the going tough. And under these conditions, Alessandro Botturi, the Italian hardman, is a lot less spectacular than he was in the dry. Even so, the KTM rider picked up points for 5th. Finland's Petri Pojamo has yet to find his form in the WEC at this stage. Absent from the Portuguese round due to injury, the World 125cc champion made his way progressively through the race to finish 4th on day 2 in Italy. Obviously, the wet conditions suited him better than the drier ones on the previous day. For this second Italian round, Arno Villanova was careful not to repeat his mistakes of the day before and was rewarded with 3rd place. But it was a very distant 3rd place to the men who finished ahead of him. He was some 2 minutes behind Juha Salminen and Paul Edmondson, who fought for the win. Edmondson had been really pleased to see the change in the weather.
What a beautiful day for me.
Riding in the mud is a Paul Edmondson speciality, and he wins the day from Juha Salminen with a 14.25 second margin of victory over his Finnish rival. With this win, Edmondson takes command of the championship.
Unfortunately, Paul Edmondson last year had a few injuries, and this year I have learned to be a little more consistent and a little more stronger with my head.
In the championship standings, Paul Edmondson takes a 2-point advantage over Salminen. His victory for Honda means that the KTM dream of a clean sweep of Enduro 2 class victories throughout the whole season has now evaporated. Nobody was expecting such a stout performance from Edmondson. In the Enduro 3 class, Marko Tarkala was the first to retire in the morning, a victim of pain from a shoulder injury. Ivan Cervantes also ran into some serious problems in the mud. Basically, Cervantes lost his cool and a ton of time, such as here, for example, when he was actually caught on a special stage by Samuli Aro. 8th on the day, Ivan finished 4 minutes and 25 seconds behind the winner. In this category, GasGas have only their 300cc two-strokes, and their 2 riders often find themselves running in mid-pack. These conditions allowed the lighter two-strokes to make a bigger mark, however. Frenchman Sébastien Guillaume took 7th, and Jani Laaksonen, seen here, finished 5th. Husqvarna, for their part, were strong, with their 2 bikes in 3rd and 4th places. Mika Ahola took 3rd, 7 seconds ahead of Anders Eriksson. The Italian constructor, however, was still looking for its first win of the year. And here's someone else that was looking for a win. At the start of the season, David Knight had set scoring regular podium finishes as his goal. After collecting 5 podium results in the first 5 races, David's ambitions were obviously higher.
Today was possible after the second lap. I was not so far and then made good the first 2 tests. And then only this problem in the last 2. I just want to have quite a big gap for 3rd place, so I just think, okay, finish 2nd and take the points rather than maybe not finish. Or so, no, a win is coming, I think.
Unfortunately for David, the excellent run of results for Samuli Aro continued with his 3rd straight victory. The result saw the Finnish star take over the lead in the Enduro Class 3, but only with a tight 3-point advantage from Spain's Ivan Cervantes. In the thick mud, it was the Finns' physical strength that made the difference. So, Samuli Aro, David Knight and Mika Ahola was how the podium shook out for the second round. The three riders were now covered by a mere 11 championship points, which made it the tightest battle in the three WEC classes.
Italy GP is always the most important GP of the season. Unfortunately, we had many trouble with the weather. Yesterday was summer, today was winter. But the organization did a good job because they adapt the rally to the weather condition. This is a proof that the Maxis FIM World Enduro Championship is growing, improving and always better.
5 constructors made the podium over the Italian GP weekend. TM, Husqvarna, Yamaha, KTM and Honda. And it was tight competition indeed for the team award at this stage. KTM Racing led the points from its Italian satellite squad KTM Farioli. Next up came UFO Corsa Yamaha, followed by the Husqvarna and Husaberg factory teams. Moving on to the French Grand Prix in early May, and the big questions were whether Stefan Merriman was really unbeatable in Enduro 1, if Juha Salminen could retake command in Enduro 2, and which one of the 3 fighters for Enduro 3 honours could break free of the others. The event took place in the picturesque Auvergne region of central France, famous for the dormant volcanoes that give a distinct look to the hilly horizons. The 72-kilometre course centred upon the little village of Saint-Rémy-sur-Durand near Clermont-Ferrand, and riders had to cover this course 3 times each day. Each lap was slightly different to the other, but all included some extremely steep climbs on the link sections, plus 4 cross tests and an extreme special stage well worthy of the name. French competitor Laurent Bouffiou took 5 kilograms of camera and recording equipment along in his backpack to give us an idea of the terrain that the riders had to cope with. The Grand Prix of France Act 1 saw the competitors take off for 8 hours of racing in very winter-like conditions. The ground was soaked, even snow-covered in some places, and the thermometer was having trouble staying above the freezing level. The Enduro 1 class with its white plates brings together the small bikes, 125cc 2-strokes, 4-stroke 250s. They were the first to take off and had the dubious honour of opening the course. Not only that, they were barely out of the Parc Fermé before the riders had to attack the Extreme Special. Not a great way to start off the day, and it certainly seemed as though some riders were struggling to wake up. The current number 2 in the Enduro 1 standings was Petteri Sylvain, and he was a strong favourite to win here in France. The Finnish rider put in a solid start to the day but made a huge mistake at the checkpoint. Sylvain was actually leading on time until that point, but was then hit with a 7-minute time penalty. On home turf, in front of 50,000 spectators dispersed all around the circuit, the French riders were obviously trying to run strong. Considered to be the best of the French competitors in this category, and already a podium finisher this season, Marc Germain took 5th place. But 16 seconds quicker than Germain was fellow Frenchman Fabien Planet. The young KTM rider was still on a learning curve in the WEC, but wasn't at all put off by the terrible weather conditions. He finished day 1 in 4th position. The French supporters even thought for a moment that Planet could snatch 3rd, but it was Sweden's Richard Larsson who climbed onto the podium. The TM rider has 10 years of experience in the World Championship, and it showed. The leader of the modest Italian team is rewarded with a podium place for the 2nd time. Poland's Bartosz Abluki, followed closely by Simone Albergoni, took second place on day one in Enduro 1, and in doing so collected his third podium of the season, as well as moving up to second in the point standings. In fact, the UFO Corsa Yamaha team scored a superb 1-2, because Abluki's team leader, Stefan Merriman, once again finished the day on top of the results sheet, notching his 6th win of the WEC season. Despite his fall in a liaison section, the Australian put in a near-perfect day of riding, being fastest in 8 of the 11 timed sections of the day. With more than 40 competitors, the Enduro 2 class is the largest in the WEC. Just to remind you, this class is comprised of 2-stroke 250 and 4-stroke 450cc machines. There were problems on day one in France for the front-runner from south of the Pyrenees, Arnaud Villeneuve. In line for second place result, the Spaniard lost it all due to a broken chain. He'd incur 7 minutes of penalty time. Meanwhile, the leading French rider in the category was Yamaha's David Fretin. He normally only contests the French National Championship, but took advantage of his wildcard invitation to finish 7th in Enduro 2. Over at the Fast Eddie Racing team, the student was surpassing the teacher. For the first time this year, New Zealand's Paul Wilby got the better of his teammate and manager Paul Edmondson. 14 seconds separated the two Honda men, with Edmondson taking 4th and Wilby 3rd. Italy's Giovanni Sala is always a favourite among the French crowds, but today he was much more than that. He was the surprise of round one. Until now in the WEC season, it had looked as though Gio was heading for retirement, but the 40-year-old Italian snared second place in Enduro 2. The 5-time world champion fully deserved the applause, as here in France, he was again right on top of his game. Although he again took the win, Juha Salminen didn't look as though he was on top form on day one in France. On this stone-studded climb, he was beaten on 2 occasions, passed most notably by Edmondson and Villeneuve. But while he wasn't necessarily having the time of his riding life on the French circuit, the Finn did take his 6th win of the year in Enduro 2 and retook the lead in the point standings from Edmondson. On day one in France, Salminen was able to put his misfortunes from the last round in Italy behind him. The Enduro 3 class is contested by the 2-stroke 300cc machines from GasGas and big 4-strokes like those from Husqvarna and Husaberg, or the 525cc thumpers from KTM. In the race for the home bragging rights, it was Sébastien Guillot who took the day with 8th place. He felt that he was the victim of a lack of power from his bike in the humid conditions towards the end of the day. Behind the leaders were the Nordic regulars in Enduro 3, with Marco Tarkala, Bjorn Karlsson, Anders Eriksson and Mikko Ahola filling the places from 7th to 4th. On the podium, it's more of the usual suspects, and once again it was the narrowest of margins between them. Only 13 seconds separated the top 3 of Samuli Aro from Finland, Ivan Cervantes from Spain and David Knight from the Isle of Man. The big graduate from the British School of Off-Road Racing was more than happy in the tough conditions, but still had to settle for 3rd. Riding in Italy under very similar conditions to these that we see here in France, Ivan Cervantes had been surprisingly slow. Since then, he'd taken 2 weeks to think about things and get back to work. On this day, he was running with the very best of the Scandinavian and came home in 2nd place, a mere 4.69 seconds behind the winner, Samuli Aro. Aro once again dominated the class thanks to a combination of his impressive physical condition and his clean and fluid riding style. His bike had broken in both Spain and Italy, but both the KTM and the Finn had been running strongly since then. And both needed to be strong in France, as did the rest of the 100 or more competitors. After 8 hours in the saddle, the first day of the French round had definitely left its mark on both riders and machines. Day 2 in France, and once again the rain was beating down. Sunday's race would be run under identical weather conditions to the day before, with the added disadvantage that the tracks would be even more torn up. After his third place the day before, Richard Larson had hoped to do a lot better than his eventual 10th place race result on day 2. Main reason for this was that the Swedish rider in the TM squad lost a lot of time, over a minute to be exact, in the extreme special. Frenchman Fabien Planet was for his part very consistent. 4th on Saturday and 5th on Sunday, and still the highest placed French rider. Many forecast that young Planet will step onto the podium before the season's end. Going better than on Saturday, Roberto Bazzuri flirted with the Enduro 1 podium. After his top 3 result at Matalica, the Italian continued to impress here with 4th place at the French Grand Prix. Bartosz Abluki was caught and passed by Albergoni in the middle of the special stage, a rare thing to happen to the young Polish rider who's among the fastest in the class, and is even a menace to Petteri Silvan for 2nd in the point standings at this stage of the season.
In the downhill, the bike started to slide and I hit one tree by head and didn't know where I am really, and lose so much time, but at the end I had my speed and I could arrive third, and for that I'm happy.
The battle for the win on day 2 in France was a two-man affair between Stefan Merriman and Petteri Silvan. The Finn was penalised the day before and was hungry for revenge. To overcome the disaster of the previous day, Silvan was prepared to push himself and his bike to the limits, as well as resorting to some rather more controversial tactics. In enduro racing, it's a common practice for the leading riders to have a gentleman's agreement that doesn't force the same rider to always open the stage, whatever his riding number might indicate. But on this day, Silvan categorically refused to open the stage when it was his turn, leaving the Australian Merriman to start off first. Whether you approve of this professional approach or not, it worked for Silvan. In the end, Stefan Merriman was relegated to 2nd place, and Silvan took the win in the class by a mere 25 one-thousandths of a second. In Enduro 2, Paul Wilby was 3rd on the Saturday but dropped to 7th on Sunday. And like many of his rivals, he can thank the spectators for playing a part even in gaining this placing. The fans were on the spot ready to give a helping hand on the steepest hill climbs, and without them, numerous riders would still be trying to find their way off the mountains here in the Auvergne region. The 2 Enduro 3 riders from the KTM Farioli team were mixing it up through day 2, with Alex Boturi taking 5th and Gio Sala 4th. And this 2nd French round was marked by the return to the podium of Spain's Arnaud Villanova. This time out, there were no chain problems for the 22-year-old from Catalonia, who took 3rd. As the weather continued to complicate matters, Paul Edmondson pulled out all the stops. The Englishman battled hard all day long in an attempt to overtake Villanova, and the experience of the Briton paid off because he edged out the Spaniard for 2nd place by a 2-second margin. And Edmondson also stood up for the organisers in the face of criticism from the other riders over the difficulty of the course.
You know, for people to criticise the organisation when they put so much time and work in, for me is really bad. And I just want to thank them for what they've done, because this, again, was a hard race. Maybe the next race is going to be easy, but like I said, it's 8 races for the World Championship. And this is a style of race in France that the people come to see. So, yeah, we have to push the bikes, but so what? I've done it many years before, so now's no different.
Juha Salminen was the front and centre subject of Edmundsen's comments, as the Finn was the spokesman for those competitors who were unhappy. But even if he wasn't all that enamoured of the French circuit, the official KTM rider was the undoubted star over the 2 days of racing. He took a second consecutive win on day 2 and relegated Edmundsen, his main rival, to second place by over a minute. For sure, Salminen already looked favourite for the Enduro 2 title. After the 4th 2-day Grand Prix of the season, he'd taken 6 of the 8 point-scoring rounds. In Enduro 3, the top-performing home nation rider was once again Sébastien Guillaume. The Frenchman had problems waking up, however, as his medication for the pain of his injured ankle made him just a bit groggy throughout the day. Even Cervantes wasn't feeling much better, finishing only 5th. The Spaniard has only 2 seasons of Enduro experience and obviously prefers to wait for the quicker motocross-style WEC stages to show off his skills. To a certain extent, the Enduro 3 class was turned on its head for the 2nd day in France because Samuel Aro lost his winning ways and could only finish 3rd, 9 seconds behind the winner. It should be noted, however, that the battle for the win was all fought out amongst the top 3 in the final special stage of the day. In the last frost test, Mika Ahola, Aro's fellow countryman, hung on for a fine 2nd place, his 2nd of the season so far. Ahola also brought the Husqvarna squad a much-needed top 3 finish after a somewhat slow beginning to the championship in Group 3. The highly deserving winner of the class was David Knight. The Briton was ahead of Ahola by a scant 62 thousandths of a second after a total of 54 minutes action in the special stages. Knight had actually thought that he was running for 2nd place on the podium, but he gave it his all in the last stage and success was his. A well-earned win when you consider his exceptional consistency since the start of the season. Following the example of his countryman Paul Edmundsen, David Knight had evolved tremendously in the privateer D3 Racing KTM team.
Yeah, the last time I won was 2002 in Spain, so it's been a while now, and I was like 120% today trying to win, and it's ended up good.
With the Isle of Man flag draped around his shoulders, David Knight was now breathing down the neck of the Spaniard Ivan Cervantes at the top of the standings and trailed the Iberian by a single point in the championship. In the team standings, the Finnish KTM racing team led from the Italian KTM Farioli team, while the UFO Corsa Yamaha squad was making a charge for the top. So, at the mid-season point of the WEC, the favourites were where you might have expected them to be. Stefan Merriman, Juha Salminen and Samuel Aro all leading their respective categories.
My name is Christine.
My name is Caroline, and welcome to Sweden.
The 2-day Swedish Enduro GP was staged in the countryside around Skövde, in the south of the country. It's the 2nd time that the WEC has visited the town, and it's already a favourite stop of the championship tour. The town itself has an easygoing atmosphere, even though it's home to over 50,000 people, and it is beautifully situated amidst lakes and pine forests. The Swedish Grand Prix was the 5th round of the Maxis World Enduro Championship, so this is the perfect time to check out what's happening in the Scandinavian world of off-road racing. One key question, of course, is whether the Swedish riders will reverse their WEC fortunes on home soil after a rather slow start to the season that has seen them well overshadowed by their Finnish neighbours. The event itself actually takes place on a huge Swedish army base, and it was the Army motorcycle display team that got the weekend underway. On each day, the competitors rode 3 laps of a 45-kilometre course that included 2 cross tests and a long point-to-point stage. Today's enduro bikes are the subject of constant development. And when it comes to innovations, GasGas is one of the leaders. Check out the company's new and very practical quick-change air filter box. And how about the experimental traction control system on the engine of Sebastian Guillaume's bike? It allows the rider to dial no less than 10 different valve settings, with the goal being to control the engine's power delivery in order to reduce wheel spin and so gain more grip. While the engines of off-road motorcycles are still continually evolving, so are the suspensions.
The Åhléns company was started in 1976 by the motocross rider Mr. Kent Åhlén himself, and he felt that the bike was developed but not the suspension, so he decided to develop it by himself, and that's the way it started, and now it's continued that way.
Åhléns is hiding more than a few top-secret projects in their research and development centre in Stockholm, and there are tales of a whole new type of front fork finding its way onto our motorcycles in the very near future.
I would say together with the engine, of course, is the biggest and most important thing. I mean, if you don't have the wheels in the ground, I mean, it doesn't really matter what bike you are on, or if you're on a Husky or GasGas or Yamaha or whatever. The suspension is getting more and more important. And now with the Enduro, which has changed a lot for this year, is more like motocross. And we can see that on the riders as well, like Cervantes and Salminen, they're doing really well, and they're doing really well in motocross as well.
It's also the long-term future that's being developed today. Following the example of car racing, motorcycle suspension could become both active and electronically controlled. It'll be interesting to see how this approach is adapted to use on off-road terrain. There was a rather relaxed atmosphere on the first day of racing in Sweden. A few raindrops were in the air, but not enough to keep down the dust that looked as though it might prove a problem over the weekend. The Enduro Class 2 led the field away, followed by the riders in Enduro 3 and then those in Class 1. After a somewhat disappointing start to the season in Enduro 1, Peter Bergvall wanted to prove himself on his home turf and emphasised that he didn't become a double world champion in the 250 four-stroke class by accident. He showed well early on, but unfortunately crashed near the midpoint of the race and took a trip to hospital instead of the podium. Luckily, his shoulder injury was not too serious. His Husqvarna teammate Roberto Bazzuri fared rather better, riding a 250cc four-stroke for the first time in the season instead of his usual 125cc two-stroke. He took 7th place in the class. With Bergvall out of contention, Rickard Larsson became the best-placed Swedish representative in Enduro 1. Larsson scored a podium result in France, and in Sweden he settled for a solid 5th place behind Italian veteran Mario Rinaldi. In the class tending to be dominated by the Yamaha 250cc four-strokes from the UFO Corsa team, Petteri Silvan and his KTM 125 two-stroke were putting up a strong fight. Even so, Silvan couldn't keep up the pace of his Yamaha rivals Merriman and Abluki. The Finn settled for 3rd at 1 minute 19 seconds behind the leader. And once again, it was a Yamaha 1-2 in Enduro 1, with Bartosz Abluki coming 2nd. The Polish rider in the WEC didn't arrive in Sweden on top form. He had a cold all weekend and even managed to spread the virus to several team members. But he still managed to take 2nd place, 32 seconds ahead of Silvan. The Day 1 winner in the class was, surprise, surprise, Stefan Merriman. His riding style's very different to Obluki's, who gets lots of air before leaning into his turn. Merriman, on the other hand, keeps his wheels on the ground and gets constant traction as a result. His style's economical but efficient and still very fast. The Aussie finished the day 48 seconds clear of his teammate.
It's difficult in the last few special tests when you have a bit of a gap and you think, I need to try to drive safe. This is very difficult to do because you're not thinking full gas all the time. You think, be a little bit careful and not make a mistake and crash, because that can ruin your day.
With all the top riders, you have photos of the riders inside the newspaper, the official newspapers of this race. And
in Enduro 2, a number of riders got lost, including ex-motocrosser Thierry Klutz. The Belgian claims to be the world champion of getting lost, but he still finished 6th after appealing to the international jury about poor route marking and having his appeal upheld. Similar time penalties for Giovanni Sala and Alex Porturi were also overturned on appeal to the jury. Arno Villanova even got lost going out of the paddock, as there were 3 choices of route and no clear direction markers. He found his way back on course, however, regained his concentration and finished 4th in the class. Ahead of the Spaniard, Andreas Torresson saved the honour of the blue and yellow by taking the only Swedish podium result of the afternoon. The Husserberg rider took the lowest step of the rostrum in Enduro 2 at nearly 90 seconds behind the leaders. If the 3rd place of Torresson was already a surprise, the 2nd place finish from Valtteri Salonen was even more surprising. Salonen, who had yet to celebrate his 21st birthday, is in his first full season in the WEC. Obviously, being a part of the official Honda HM team paid dividends for him as he bested some of the more renowned riders in Enduro 2. Perhaps we're seeing a future champion in Salonen. Juha Salminen comfortably took his 7th win of the year in the World Championship. The WEC won't have a round in Finland this year, so the Works KTM rider considered the Swedish GP as his home race. And the world's #1 didn't disappoint. Like Merriman in Enduro 1, he stamped his authority on the class by taking 10 of the 11 stages on day 1.
an applause, 4, hey!
Most of the 15,000 spectators who turned out came to see this man, Anders Eriksson, 7 times a world champion and the undisputed king of Swedish enduro racing.
The season hasn't been great to me so far, so I really believe that this can be like a turning point for me, and it's going to be great to ride in front of the home crowd.
Last year, Anders Eriksson notched another world title on his racing leathers. But this year, he's off his usual dominant form. Running as high as 2nd at half distance on day 1 of his home race, he still ended the day only 6th best in Enduro 3. Spain's Ivan Cervantes finished 5th, but did take the prize for the most spectacular fall of the day. On the landing off a jump, Cervantes flew over the handlebars of his bike. Groggy throughout the rest of the day and running on pure adrenaline, he still got on with the business in hand and went on to put in his fastest time after the crash. Marko Tarkala for once had a consistent day's ride. The Husserberg mounted Finn took 3rd and collected his 2nd podium of the season. His first had been in Portugal, and observers had, mistakenly as it turned out, forecast that he'd be a season-long fixture at the top of Group 3. More than a minute ahead of Tarkala in 2nd place was David Knight. He also took advantage of the below-par performance of Cervantes to move up to 2nd in the season's title chase. A fine day for the Briton, who's extremely consistent as well as fast and can always profit from his rival's smallest errors. The Swedes and the Finns are great rivals, so it must have hurt the locals to see a 2nd Finnish win of the day on Swedish soil. It was the 4th win of the season in Enduro 3 for Samuli Aro, and the factory KTM man won with a 24-second cushion. He was never under any serious threat, and with a larger lead in the overall standings, the Finnish champion could afford to relax a little. After a particularly rich 2003, capped off by world titles for Peter Bergvall and Anders Ericsson, Swedish enduro efforts this year have been somewhat in the doldrums. The Swedish stars have struggled in all three categories. So Sven-Erik Jonsson, a veritable legend in Swedish enduro circles, is here to support his fellow countryman and his good friend Anders Ericsson. The 6 times world champion has retired from active competition, but he's here as an informed observer and provides an optimistic viewpoint.
It's always tight when they make 5 to 3 classes. Anders have maybe a little bit luck. Last year was not the hardest class, and also for Bergvall, for example. But I think the Swedish driver have to maybe think about the future a little bit, and for 6 days to make something different.
These days, Husqvarna is the sole 100% Swedish constructor on the market, as Husqvarna are now Italian-owned and built in Italy. In command of the Swedish team is the man who has developed the Husqvarna bikes since the appearance of the first prototype in 1988.
Yeah, I have 2 European championships, because when I win 85 and 88 it was no world championship.
Yeah.
At that time I was working for Husqvarna when it was placed in Sweden. And when it was moved to Italy, 1987, we started this company, Husqvarna, 1988. And since then I've been working for them.
It takes a very fit man to tame the very large and very fast Husqvarnas. And Husqvarna have 3 of them. There are 2 Swedes, Bjorn Karlsson and Andreas Torresson, and the rider from Finland, Marko Tarkala. And it's the latter who's scoring the best results for the team so far in 2004. A native of Helsinki, Tarkala now makes his home in Malaga, Spain. He trains each day alongside his close friend Samuli Aro and has made consistent progress since the start of the season. Despite his successes for Husqvarna, Marko Tarkala is very much a Finn, and the Swedish public is still in search of a successor to Anders Ericsson. For the second round here in Sweden, the sun was a very welcome addition to the weekend progress. To the relief of the riders, the Sunday race would run 1 less lap, as the course had degraded considerably. Italy is the country most represented in the Enduro 1 class, and an Italian rider to keep an eye on is Alessandro Bellometti. The former motocross rider, who now runs in the colours of the KTM Farioli team, scored his best result to date in the 2004 championships by taking 6th place. Ahead of Bellometti were 2 of the riders from the stout UFO Corsa team. Veteran Italian star Mario Rinaldi took 5th on the day, while his young teammate from Poland, Bartosz Obluki, wound up 4th. Obluki was 2nd in the championship chase at this stage of the season and couldn't afford to lose too much ground to his principal rival, Petteri Silvan. The Finnish rider's keen to take advantage of the smallest mistake committed by Obluki, and in the second round he takes 3rd to close the gap between he and the Polish man. There are now only 3 Grand Prix before the end of the season, so Silvan will have to pull out all the stops to make up the 4-point deficit to Obluki in the points table. Simone Albagoni is capable of the best and the worst. The Italian rider in the Honda HM Zanardo team has had mixed results, both good and bad, but is still tipped as a future champion by many in the paddock. The second Swedish round was one of his better results, as he came home in 2nd. Stefan Merriman is the exact opposite of Albagoni and remains as consistent as ever in notching up top results. He takes win number 7 of the season and can now begin to think seriously about taking the world's title back down under. Even so, he's not a fan of the points distribution in the WEC. Not enough points for the winning rider, and maybe too many for the lower places, is his opinion. Be that as it may, the Australian now has a commanding 46-point lead from his closest rival. Since the Italian Grand Prix, Paul Wilby has put in a few top runs and has consistently placed in the top 5 of the Enduro 2 class. In Sweden, he stays true to form and finishes with a very respectable 5th place on the second day. The New Zealander finishes ahead of both Arno Villanova and Mika Sarankowski. Alessandro Buturi, has also been a regular amongst the leaders of Enduro 2. This time out, the former rugby man wound up in 4th place. But more than his results on the day, his most impressive attribute is his consistency. One just has to look at where Buturi is in the overall standings for proof that he's capable of a podium placement come the end of the year. And now for a completely different style, one where aesthetics prevail over aggressiveness as Paul Edmondson takes 3rd place in the class. The Englishman was able to sneak past Buturi on the last stage on Sunday for his spot on the podium. Very few thought it possible that the young Finn, Valtteri Salonen, could repeat his 2nd place finish from the previous day. In fact, Salonen once again put in a stellar performance. Despite a small fall when he lost a handful of seconds, he was able to battle back and beat the veteran Edmondson by 20 seconds for another runner-up result. So Salonen, the student, took 2nd, finishing in the shadows of the professor, Juha Salminen. The KTM Works rider put in a perfect day of riding, with 9 stage wins from a possible 9, which of course led to his 8th win of the 2004 World Championship. In the class standings, Juha Salminen now has a 24-point advantage from Paul Edmondson. The places are now very well fixed in the category, and the Finn is really an odds-on bet for the title. Sixth on the Saturday, Anders Eriksson went one better in Enduro 3 on the Sunday. His Husqvarna teammate Mika Ahola, however, was forced to retire. His rear shock absorber broke on landing from a jump, making it impossible for him to carry on. It was a rare mechanical problem for the Finn. Bjorn Karlsson was in fact the highest placed home nation rider in Enduro 3. The 3rd man, with Eriksson and Ahola in the Husqvarna team, came home ahead of both of them in 4th place. In 3rd was Ivan Cervantes. David Knight once again finished 2nd. The rider from the Isle of Man repeated his fine performance from the day before and widened the gap a little more between he and Cervantes. And finally, this Grand Prix of Sweden was more of a Sunday stroll for Finland's Samuli Aro. He scored 8 best stage times on his way to a 25-second margin of victory overnight. Aro now has a 17-point lead in the overall championship standings from Knight, while Cervantes is another 7 points adrift.
Moje meno je Zuzana.
Sa volám Martina.
A obe pochádzame zo Slovenska. Welcome.
Round 6 of the World Enduro Championship was the first of the year in Eastern Europe, more specifically in Slovakia. The 5 million inhabitants are a relatively young people, mirroring the recent history of the country after it gained independence from Czechoslovakia in 1993. Považka Bystrica is a small town of 30,000 tucked away at the foot of the Tatra Mountains, and it is the hallowed ground of Slovakian all-terrain competition. On 3 different occasions it's played host to the famous international 6 Days Enduro, and Slovakia will again be the venue for this prestigious event in 2005. With ideal terrain, the WEC organisers had laid out a traditional enduro circuit. Over the course of the weekend, the riders would cover 3 70-kilometre laps, with each lap including 2 circuit stages and 1 point-to-point special, as well as very tight liaison sections. Time to get down to the business of racing. The Slovakian sun was slow to rise on day 1 as the 80 competitors set off for 8 hours on their bikes. In Enduro 1, there are 7 Slovakian and Czech wildcard riders. It's perhaps more of a learning experience than a true participation because these invitees are relegated to the back of the starting order with more than a 10-minute gap between them and the leaders. At the front, however, there were 9 men separated by less than 2 minutes. And at midday, as has become the norm, Stefan Merriman was leading the pack. Behind the Australian, things were a lot more interesting. Among the contenders for a podium result were Bartosz Abluki and Simone Albagoni. But there were other riders that we hadn't seen this far up the standings all season. Riders such as Portugal's Helder Rodrigues and number 24, seen here, Italy's Alessio Paoli on the TM. Petteri Silvan was well off the pace on day 1. Struggling from the start, the Finnish championship candidate could do no better than 6th. On this first day of Enduro 1, it was the battle for 4th place that was the most intense. Helder Rodrigues versus Alessio Paoli, 2 riders more accustomed to finishing towards the bottom of the top 10. Faster by a mere second, Rodrigues took 4th place, while Paoli had to be content with 5th. For the pair of them, however, it was by far their best showing so far in the 2004 WEC. In another 2-man battle, it was the Italian Simone Albagoni on the Honda against Poland's Bartosz Obluki on the UFO Yamaha. This time out, Obluki is having his troubles trying to stay within contact of team leader Stefan Merriman.
Stefan is leading for the moment and I am third. I try to catch Simone Albagoni. We see.
Bartosz Obluki ran solidly on the 2 circuit stages, but the young Polish rider systematically lost time in the point-to-point special, to the tune of 10 seconds, in fact. Far too much to hold off Simone Albagoni. It was Bartosz taking 3rd, while Albagoni stood 1 place higher on the podium. Once again, Stefan Merriman stamped his authority on the Enduro 1 class. Winner of all the timed sections, he won with a 52-second margin. The world title is getting nearer, though Merriman doesn't dare begin thinking about it.
Well, it's still a long way, you know, there is still another 4 or 5 races to go, so 5 days, and just keep pushing along and hopefully it'll come in the end, but you have to keep focused all the time and not make any mistakes.
The Enduro 2 class is for 250cc 2-strokes and 450cc 4-strokes. 13 wildcards were invited, and among them was former Slovakian champion Emil Kundelik, still running strong at the age of 48. For once, Giovanni Sala was not the oldest rider in Enduro 2. 3 weeks after Sweden and his 2 second-place finishes, all on hand were anticipating a lot from the young Finn Valtteri Salonen. The Honda rider struggled, however, and only managed a modest 6th place in this first round. At 21 years of age, Valtteri Salonen certainly doesn't have the experience of 40-year-old Gio Sala. Like his younger rival, the Italian veteran was also a bit off the pace, but did manage to stay within the top 5. Up ahead, it was still the same old story with the same old riders. There was the fiery young Spaniard, Arno Villanova. The stylish English gentleman, Paul Edmondson. The broad-shouldered Italian rugby player, Alessandro Botturi. and the Finnish metronome, Juha Salminen. For one of the rare times this season, however, Salminen found himself in a perilous situation points-wise because he took a fall due to a broken rear brake. In fact, the KTM racing rider lost a few seconds, but not his hold on the championship lead. And who'd make their way onto the podium? It would be impossible to answer that question until the end of the last special of the day. Coming fourth was Spain's Arno Villanova. Less than a second ahead was Alessandro Botturi. The KTM Farioli team rider took third place, just behind Paul Edmondson. But the Italian rider was the victim of lapped riders who cost him precious seconds in the first morning special stage. He definitely merited better. Despite a couple of falls on the Slovakian turf, Juha Salminen had a relatively easy day of it. He took the Enduro 2 win by a 49-second margin, and it was his 9th victory of the season. The riders in the Enduro 3 big bike class were the first to start the Slovakian festivities. But first, they had to fire up. The Husqvarna of Anders Eriksson is having trouble, and he started his day with a 10-second penalty. Despite this, Anders would go on to finish 7th. Spain's Ivan Cervantes wound up 6th, but was obviously not totally at ease on the greasy and slippery Slovak terrain on the first stages of the day. Mika Ahola on the Works Husqvarna took 4th ahead of Sebastian Guillaume. Since the start of the season, the Frenchman had been hampered by a recurring ankle injury. Finally, a 100% fit Guillaume was able to ride to his full ability and duly scored his first podium of 2004. It was the second of his young career, and there'll obviously be a lot more in the future. Guillaume's placing also meant that the rider of a two-stroke stood on the Enduro 3 podium for the first time of 2004. Up ahead, the race for the win was again a two-man affair between Samuli Aro and David Knight. The aggressive riding of the Englishman was rewarded with a fine 2nd place, but it was the smooth riding of the Finn that paid the biggest dividend. It was the 8th WEC victory of the season for Samuli. Day 2 from Slovakia and the 12th point-scoring round of the World Championship. Just like the previous day, the competitors faced nearly 8 hours in the saddle. And after a full 8 hours of riding on the previous day, the riders now know the special stages by heart. The 2 motocross tests have become single-line affairs, so that it now will be difficult to make up any real time on them. The point-to-point special is where all the drama will be played out. We ride on board with Laurent Bouffieux over the ideal terrain for posting a strong result, provided you're one of those few who can come to terms with the improvisational part of a true enduro test. On day 2 of Enduro 1, 2 of the leaders from the previous day were less at ease. Helder Rodriguez and Alessio Paoli dropped down to the second half of the leaderboard. On the other hand, over more and more rutted trails, Roberto Bazzuri and his Husqvarna rose to the occasion, and the Italian pairing took 4th place. At the head of the field, it was Stefan Merriman still the leader, while Simone Albergoni, who we see here, and Bartosz Abluki battled it out for the 2nd place on the day. With only 2 Grand Prix left in the season, the struggle between those two took on a new dimension. The two men were having to go for it harder than ever because the second place in the World's Championship was certainly awaiting one of them at the end of the year. So Bartosz Obluki, finishing third as he did on Saturday, conceded vital points to his rival Albagoni.
In the championship now it's quite close for the second place, and now I think Petter is a little bit more in the back. He's like 12-13 points. He's fourth and Simone is about 9. But if we have so many riders in the class that is enough one day, one bad day and the other rider have a good day and you can lose everything. So now I try to focus on trainings, now a little bit rest, then training and then keep the position to the end.
Stefan Merriman didn't have the same problem as his teammate Obluki, and that's not surprising. With a 56-point advantage overall, he could afford to relax. Yet the Australian still prefers to attack. He wins with consummate ease and just obliterates the rest of the riders in the category with a 1 minute 23-second margin of victory at the end of the day. He most notably took a mega 27 seconds from his closest challenger Albagoni on the point-to-point stage. In Enduro 2, for the medium-sized bikes, there's little room for surprises because the positions have been pretty much cast in stone since the start of the season. Only Alex Zani created a bit of a stir in this class with his 5th place result. Coming from the 500 Grand Prix Motocross Series, the Italian turned heads last year at the French Grand Prix, but until now his 2004 had been unspectacular. Then, albeit a bit late, he showed his mettle in Slovakia by finishing in the top 5. Second in the championship standings to Salminen, England's Paul Edmondson was 4th on the day, but there's clearly little respect for the older crowd from the new young guns of the WEC. Throughout day 2 in Slovakia, the 21-year-old Spaniard Arno Villanova took the battle to the experienced Edmondson with the no-holds-barred flair of youth and pushed Fast Eddie out of a podium placing. In the battle between the 250cc two-stroke Hondas against the 450cc four-stroke KTMs, it's the Austrian-based manufacturer that's had the upper hand at this late stage of the season. KTM saw 2 of its works riders on the top steps of the podium in Enduro 2. Alessandro Botturi rode hard to wind up second, but was still easily bested by the inevitable top man of the class. Juha Salminen claimed his 10th win of 2004 in the World Enduro Championship. The gaps in the points table are large in Enduro 2. Unless one of the riders puts in a really substandard performance or has big machine problems, the positions will almost certainly remain as they are. In Enduro 3, for the largest machines, there was a return to form of the CH racing team Husqvarnas. For the first time this year, Anders Eriksson was very competitive and finished 5th, albeit 44 seconds off the leader's time. Mika Ahola also rediscovered lost pace and finished 4th, 37 seconds adrift. It seems that rutted terrain in the dry is more favourable to riders with motocross experience, and the Day 2 third-place performance from Ivan Cervantes illustrated that best. But the Spaniard needs to improve even more. After the opening 2 Grand Prix of 2004, many had him pegged as a world champion, but as the season has progressed, he's shown signs of weakness in his riding armoury. Cervantes likes the jumps and rutted terrain, but he doesn't care at all for specials run on grass. He hasn't as yet come to terms with the slippery surface, and he frequently falls. Ahead of Cervantes came David Knight, who was particularly impressive on the point-to-point special stage. The friendly Manxman was on top form at this three-quarter point of the season, and already the buzz in the paddock was that many an official factory team were interested in his services for 2005. Samuli Aro once again triumphed in Enduro 3. Like his teammate and friend Juha Salminen, he was looking forward to the WEC summer break. The Slovakian event took place at the end of June, and there was no World Enduro competition scheduled for either July or August. Samuli planned to keep fit by riding motocross and making his debut in Supermoto. the Finnish rider would probably be even faster by the time he rejoined most of the other WEC regulars for the International 6 Days Enduro in Poland. So, as the Slovakian event closed out the first part of the season, Aro, Knight and Cervantes were the men on the Enduro 3 podium. That was how they stood in the championship standings, but there'd be no room for error for any of these title contenders in the final 2 WEC rounds that would follow the ISDE. And in the manufacturer standings at the summer break, it was the KTM racing team in the lead, from the UFO Corsa Yamaha and the Italian KTM Farioli Satellite Squadra. Every year, the riders in the World Enduro Championship take a break from their normal schedule to contest the International 6 Days Enduro. Many of them will be riding as one of the 6 trophy team members, representing their country in this Olympics of motorcycling. The younger riders may well be on the 4-man junior trophy squad for the under-24 stars of the future, and still more will be riding as independent or club team riders. The ISDE is now in its 79th running. Last year, Brazil was the host. Could Finland hold on to the world trophy they won so decisively in Latin America? And could France successfully defend the junior title? They were the questions that awaited answers over the first week of September in the countryside around Kielce in southeastern Poland. The town has a population of more than 200,000, and many of them are young, as it has one of the largest student populations in the country. Even so, the locals hold on to their traditions and religious beliefs. All the more so since it's less than 2 decades since the country was under communist rule. Poland is hosting the ISDE for the 4th time, but it's the first time they've done so since the Iron Curtain between Western and Eastern Europe was pulled aside. Considering that there are plenty of rolling hills and forests in the region, the course was disappointing. It consisted mostly of motocross-style special stages with linking sections on minor roads and wooded areas. There were only 3 different loops over the 6 days and only 6 different special stages. There were no real climbs, and the 6 days threatened to be repetitive for both riders and fans. In Poland, enduro racing is extremely popular, and in the communist years, the riders from Eastern Europe, like the Poles, Czechs and East Germans, were often at the top of the ISDE standings. Since those days, Poland has not been so visible on the international scene, and the new generation has been slow to be competitive outside its borders. The one real exception is Bartosz Obluki. Exiled for the past 5 years in Italy, where he races in World Enduro Championship events for the UFO Corsa Yamaha team, the lone Pole in WEC has been a revelation this season.
We've been training quite a lot together in the last 2 months, and it seems like it helped a little bit to the guys, and I also helped them to set up the bike a little bit, and it seems to work. So we see at the end of 6 days.
Many young Polish riders would like to follow in Obluki's footsteps, and Michael Schuster has been very impressive in the European Championships. But Obluki was the rider that the local crowds hoped to see take the honours in Enduro 1. Therefore, they were well pleased on day 1 of the 6 days, as it saw Obluki at the top of the standings in his class, ahead of his WEC rival Simone Albergoni of Italy. England's Paul Edmondson usually rides a 250cc Honda 2-stroke, but he switched to a smoother but less powerful 4-stroke for the ISDE, and he finished 3rd in the class standings. In Enduro 2, Australia's Stefan Merriman had decided to change engine size so as to better take on his principal rival, Juha Salminen. Merriman's ISDE mount was a 450cc Yamaha WR 4-stroke, and in the first day's battle, it was the Aussie who came out on top. Salminen, in fact, finished the day with a 40-second deficit after the brakes of his KTM locked up in a special stage. Just as in the WEC, the Enduro 3 class is for the big bikes, and the day 1 results had a familiar look about them. Ivan Cervantes took 4th, while 3rd was David Knight, despite a heavy fall that knocked him out, and some mechanical problems as well. Finland's Mika Ahola was second on his Husqvarna, and once again it was his KTM riding compatriot Samuli Aro at the top of the list. Finland won easily in the 2003 event in Brazil, and few people would bet against their six-man squad here in Poland. Not when they've riders like Samuli Aro, Mika Ahola, Petteri Silvan and Juha Salminen, backed up by Mika Sarankoski and Jani Laaksonen. It was no surprise to anyone, therefore, to see Finland at the top of the 2004 World Trophy standings on day one of the ISDE in Poland. The Finnish team manager was the veteran rider Kari Tianen, one of the great champions of the Enduro scene himself. He was actually riding on the victorious Finnish team in Brazil.
It's just the first day, and I think when tomorrow it will be better for Finns. There is coming more bumps and everything, especially in those sandy testes, and there I think normally Finns are very strong.
Competition for the Finnish team would most likely come from Sweden and Italy. The French and British teams were also possible contenders for the top spot. The trophy standings for the first day revealed that Finland had a slim lead from Italy, and that those two teams had already put some daylight between them and the other nations. France was third, Sweden was fourth, and Great Britain lay fifth. And after a second day of riding, that was still the position, although the Italians had trimmed 17 seconds from the Finns' lead. But even though the World Trophy standings are usually the focus of the 6 days, the really big news on day two was the virtual elimination of Juha Salminen from the event. The Finnish champion was the major loser on day two due to engine problems with his KTM. A 55-minute penalty was the result of the time he lost while making repairs. 5 minutes more and he'd have been out of the event. As it is, Salminen can continue riding, but so far behind he can do nothing to help his teammates. Fortunately for them, the ISDE regulations allow a team to drop the score of its worst rider. In the individual standings, however, the fact that Salminen is out of contention means that the door to the overall ISDE win is wide open for Stefan Merriman. Another Finn, Valtteri Salonen, was a major surprise in second place, as he was only on the junior trophy team. Salonen was ahead of Spanish junior trophy team member Arno Villanova in third and Petri Pojamo in fourth. For the older generation, there was more bad luck. The Husqvarna of former world champion Anders Eriksson broke its clutch, and although he was able to repair it at the end of the day, he suffered a huge time penalty. Like Salminen, he was out of the running.
Not so easy, but this is a team event and you have to do everything for the team. So it was never in my mind that give up or anything. Just keep on going, try to fix the bike, try to find out what is the problem. And I think we solved it and we can push again for tomorrow.
Going back to the subject of the young guns of the Enduro scene, there were also two more juniors in the top 5 of the big bike Enduro 3 category. Ivan Cervantes of Spain was fourth after day 2, ahead of Finland's Marko Tarkala. At the top, however, it was David Knight in second and Samuli Aro at the head of the list. At this point, Aro was also leading Stefan Merriman in the race for overall individual honours. There was rain on day 3, and although Juha Salminen is totally out of contention, he was still out there competing. He was so far behind that he could be of no help to the Finnish team, so his aim was simply to try and top the overall individual standings for each of the remaining days, and prove that he's the equal, or better, of Stefan Merriman. The factory KTM rider did actually best Stefan Merriman by 11 seconds to take the overall win for the day. The third day of the ISDE was marred by 2 terrible incidents. Firstly, a road accident involving Dutch support rider Jose Pruin, in which Pruin's motorcycle hit a car in traffic. Pruin and the 2 Polish passengers in the vehicle were sadly killed in the accident. And cruelly, another tragedy hit the Enduro fraternity on the same day. German rider Sven Enderlin succumbed to injuries he suffered when he hit a tree branch in a liaison section. The 26-year-old Enderlin had only recently won the German Enduro Championship. Day 4 of the event was therefore a day of mourning. After the events of the previous day, the entire paddock could think only of the victims and their families. A minute of silence was observed and black armbands worn. In Enduro 1 competition on day 4, Simone Albergoni was in trouble right from the start. His Honda wouldn't fire up due to a compression problem, and the Italian Junior Trophy team rider was forced to retire. With Albergoni gone, it seemed like clear sailing for Bartosz Obluki. The local hero was now odds-on favourite in Enduro 1, but Obluki couldn't rest on his laurels as he had to face the challenge from the leader of the French team, Marc Germain. He matches Obluki's times all day long, and the Polish star took the win by a mere 3 seconds from the Frenchman. Behind them came the surprise of this year's ISDE. Another local hero, Michael Schuster, finished third to give the Yamaha WR250cc 4-stroke a clean sweep of the day's Enduro 1 podium. Returning to Enduro 2 and the 450 Yamaha, Stefan Merriman destroyed the field and in doing so took revenge on Juha Salminen for his victory on the previous day.
Yeah, it's very nice today. No dust and it's a nice ride today.
At this stage of the race, what's the most important to do?
Is keep concentration, because as many hours we've been driving the bike and you have to keep thinking all the time. It's easy to become relaxed.
David Knight finally got the better of Samuli Aro on day 4. The Briton, who'll be part of the full KTM factory team in 2005 World Enduro Championship competition, took the honours in Enduro 3. After the 4th day of competition, the World Trophy was beginning to lose some of its lustre. Finland had a 2-minute lead from Italy, while France was in third, 4.5 minutes behind the Finns. Sweden remained in 4th. The team in yellow and blue was counting on the experience of their riders to keep them in contention. Among them is Anders Eriksson, a 7-time world champion, along with Bjorn Karlsson, Anders Torresson and TM rider Richard Larsson, an ageing generation but still as competitive as ever. Trailing Sweden was Great Britain in 5th and Australia 6th. This 5th day of racing will see the riders set off on the final loop of trails and tests, a mix of the tracks from the previous days. The last day of competition would centre on the traditional final motocross races. While knowing that the ISDE offers many different challenges from normal WEC competition, Paul Edmondson didn't think he'd have to call upon his jogging skills, but the Englishman was forced to push his 4-stroke Honda for several kilometres to reach the Parc Fermé. The following morning, he'd have just 10 minutes of authorised time to complete the repairs. Edmondson took 3 minutes in penalty time and dropped out of contention in the Enduro 1 category.
Just a small problem with the bike, so not sure exactly what the problem is, but just trying to fix it at the moment.
Merriman is once again the man of the day. The diminutive Aussie takes the class and the overall win on day 5. He finishes 6 seconds ahead of Salminen on the day and is certain to take the honours for the top individual rider in the event. Merriman seems to be establishing himself as the world's #1 in Enduro competition.
Yeah, it's been quite a long day. As all days, it's been pretty long and a little bit dusty today because haven't had enough rain and going over the same tracks as before. But in the special tests, I managed to push hard and win today, so I'm very happy about that. They were very difficult tests, typical sort of Scandinavian, soft, sandy, difficult conditions for me because I'm used to the hard pack of Italy. But no, I'm really happy.
By the end of day 5, it must be recognised that Finland has won again in the trophy class. The final motocross day rarely throws up any surprises, especially when a team's so far ahead. Behind Finland come Italy, France, Sweden and Great Britain. Nothing has changed since the first day, so the ISDE hierarchy of recent years has held good for the 2004 event as well. There was, however, one outstanding performance from one of the outsider teams. In 6th place since the first day, the Australians have been superb. They've been running hard and posting competitive times all week. That summer break coaching from star rider Stefan Merriman obviously did the trick.
Yeah, I went back in August when we had a small break here and tried to get the guys motivated a little bit more because it's such a big trip to come over here. And yeah, no, they're all going good, and all the riders still in, so that's a good thing.
The following final day of competition ended in chaos, so Paul Edmondson really needn't have bothered to do an incredible 10-minute valve change on his Honda, dropping just 10 seconds in the process. After the Enduro 1 motocross event, the riders complained about dust and spectator controls, and the Enduro 2 and 3 competitors refused to take part in any further races. The ISDE closed amid scenes of argument, threats and recrimination. Most riders were glad to get away and think about the next World Enduro Championship round in Greece. Look out for the climbs, the rocks and the very fast portions. Giving us these onboard camera images is the legendary Finn and 7-time world champion Kari Tiainen.
Well, it's quite interesting. A lot sandy part always there in river, and then pretty hard in the mountains. It's very similar than Spain, for example.
WEC, many a young rider has stood out during the Grand Prix events, and the larger teams are ready to give the younger guys their opportunities. Take the example of the Italians in the Honda HM team, where the Italian rider Simone Albergoni is still in contention for a season-ending podium finish in Enduro 1, and Valtteri Salonen from Finland has made his mark on more than a few occasions in Enduro 2.
The atmosphere is good, and everybody, especially team managers, speak English, and Albergoni also very good, and so we have a good feeling.
After the departure of Stefan Merriman to Yamaha for the 2004 season, the Honda HM team has come back strong thanks to these two young and talented riders. The Italian team will be looking to continue this strategy next year, and many are touting Spain's Arno Villanova to join the squad. One thing's sure, the new wave of riders has the official support of the constructors, which is something they haven't done in the past. And what's even more encouraging is that the World Junior category is on the cards for next year. In Enduro more than anywhere else, talent doesn't have to wait for a number of years to be rewarded. The all-terrain world, and more generally the motorcycle world, is a close-knit family. And at Jerez, the WEC family was in mourning. Richard Saint was the victim of a fatal accident during the running of the Faroes Rally, and Sven Enderlin was killed during the ISDE in Poland. Those in the paddock paid their respects to the pair with a minute of silence. Moving on to the race, the 69 entrants for the Grand Prix of Greece set off for 7 hours of bike competition. In Enduro 1, the hottest battle was for third place in the overall standings. Simone Albergoni was in a fight with Finland's Petteri Silvan, and the two men were separated by a mere 4 points. They were also running on the same minute, and thus all eyes were on this duo. On the first day of racing in Greece, Simone Albergoni got the upper hand. He took the 20 points for third place, finishing in front of Silvan by just 3 seconds. The Finnish rider was actually quicker in the special tests, but his bike became waterlogged in a stream during the Enduro portion. Second place on the day went to Bartosz Obluki. The Polish rider needed a top result because he only had a 9-point lead over the hard-charging Albergoni. So his second place came at the right time. He could have done even better. Leading until midday, he lost his lead during a riding mistake when he fell and cost himself 15 precious seconds. Despite Obluki's error, it was really no surprise to anyone when his teammate Stefan Merriman won the day. The Australian from the UFO Corsa Yamaha team already had one hand on the world title trophy. The calculation was simple. A fourth-place finish on day 2 would clinch the World Championship for Merriman. Merriman, Obluki and Albergoni was the current order of the World Championship standings, with 3 point-scoring opportunities remaining. At this point of the season, some riders aren't hesitating to change machines with an eye towards next year. For example, Swedish rider Peter Bergvall, who's back from injury, has switched from the 250cc 4-stroke Husqvarna in Enduro 1 for an Enduro 2 450. Bergvall is still rusty from his summer layoff and is slow coming to grips with the bigger bike. He finishes down in 15th place, nearly 4 minutes slower than the class leader. Alessandro Botturi is also back from injury after having broken his foot during the ISDE. The pain is still too strong, even for the ex-professional rugby player, and Botturi retired early on in the morning. As is often the case with this type of course layout, all was decided between the Enduro 2 riders in the point-to-point special, where the riders had to take greater risks on unfamiliar terrain. Shaken but not stirred, Valtteri Salonen is still on the attack. At the end of the day, the young Finn finishes fourth.
I don't know, there was some stone or wood, I don't know, and it bike stopped there and I go like, whoa.
Another Finn, Petri Pojamo, is back on top form, the kind of form that saw him take the 125 World Championship last year. He finished third in Enduro 2.
Yeah, everything started to be now okay with my family, my head and my legs, so start to come better.
If it weren't for Englishman Paul Edmondson, the Finnish rider Juha Salminen would have clinched the world title ages ago. Here, on the first day in Greece, Edmondson finished second once again. He continued to be the fly in Salminen's ointment. So, armed with plenty of patience, Salminen bided his time. The world title was ever so close, but not yet won. Salminen absolutely dominated the class in taking the win, almost a minute and a half ahead of Edmondson. But the Finn still had to wait a little longer to be crowned world champion.
Actually, I didn't count the points now, but it's slowly, but it's coming, you know. No hurry, I can wait, you know. Just the important thing is that the victory.
Enduro 3 is the group for the largest bikes. It's also the category with the fewest competitors in the WEC, and at Ceres only 11 came to compete. At the front of the class, 5 riders finished within 1 minute of each other. Mikko Ahola finished the day in 5th, while his Husqvarna teammate and defending world champion, Anders Eriksson, took 4th place. Third place went to Ivan Cervantes. It was most likely the last time the Spaniard would compete on the big 525cc KTM. Next year, he's scheduled to race on the smaller 250cc four-stroke. As has become a ritual, David Knight came second in the class, but neither he nor any of the other top big bike riders have ever really been able to keep up with the class leader, Samuli Aro. On day 1 in Greece, the Finn once again won Enduro 3 and did so by 45 seconds. That made it 9 wins so far this season. In the WEC, there are a group of riders who stay in the shadows, but whose contribution is extremely important in guaranteeing the success of a rider and a team. These shadow riders are omnipresent and always ride complete with a large backpack. They need to be large because inside them are about 20 kilograms of spare parts. Former pro riders for the most part and always experienced mechanics, the shadow riders offer rapid on-trail assistance for the competitors. Why then are the shadow riders not going to be around for 2005? One reason is that the teams have said it's getting just too expensive to have them along. The bikes are much more reliable these days and rapid assistance is no longer justified. But it's also a question of safety. The shadows are particularly exposed to the dangers of traffic accidents.
For me, it's maybe better that they disappear and just everybody can help then in the special tests, you know, just with a drink, because right now it's so much work for the shadow riders trying to get from check to check, and like this race they had to ride really fast on the roads, so for me it's maybe safer and better for the sport that we stop the shadow riders.
So things are happening fast and the shadow riders are to disappear from the rule books. They'll definitely be forbidden, but the new rules will clearly be difficult to control. Enduro veterans already see the door swinging wide open towards eventual cheating. If the shadow riders officially disappear, they'll almost certainly continue to exist even deeper in the gloom. The Shadows themselves are adamant about this. They form an integral part of the folklore of international enduro racing. Out of the Shadows now and on to day 2 of the competition. It still felt like summer in Greece despite the fact that it was October. The temperatures were warm, so the riders were glad to have the opportunity to refresh themselves in the stream crossings found in the Enduro test. The motocross riders who've given Enduro a try are numerous, but those who've had success are rare. But that's not the case with Italian Alessandro Bellometti. This year Bellometti made his debut in Enduro and has since been a regular point scorer. In Greece on Sunday, he saw all of his hard work pay off with an excellent 3rd place, his first ever podium result in the WEC. In second came Simone Albagoni, and what an important second place it was for the Italian as far as the overall championship standings were concerned. His principal adversary, Bartosz Obluki, could only manage a 4th place finish. With 1 Grand Prix remaining, Albagoni was now just 7 points adrift from his Polish rival. For Finland's Petteri Silvan, however, a top 3 finish at the end of the year wasn't looking good after he finished his race in 5th. He still had a mathematical chance, but logically he could really expect no better than 4th overall. On the other hand, for Stefan Merriman, this would be remembered as a very special day. A 4th place finish was all he needed to clinch the world title in Enduro 1.
At the moment, not even thinking about world title. I just ride every special test and think about every special test, and at the end of the day we see what's happened.
So there you have the tactics of the Australian. He's content to run without paying too much attention to the time set by his opponents. He could have been satisfied with making the minimum effort, but he still attacks the course as strongly as ever. And the positive approach pays off. Not only does he win the class, but he also clinches the World Enduro 1 Championship.
Stefan, you are world champion. How do you feel?
Really happy, very, very happy now. It's been a tough weekend for me because I had these stomach problems 2 or 3 days ago and had a lot of pain in the stomach, and yesterday I was riding on only 50%. Today this afternoon feel a lot better, and no, I'm very happy to be finished like this, win World Championship.
Back in the UFO Yamaha camp, the team were finally able to celebrate with their champion. Merriman had won his 4th world title and was soon to become a father. An extraordinary year for the Aussie.
Yeah, it's a fantastic year. It's probably the best year we've had in Europe this year because Stefan's won so easily this year, and yeah, the team's been fantastic, and yeah, I'm really happy to have the baby. It won't be long now, so.
So the first championship in the new look WEC went to Stefan Merriman. But in Enduro 1, the battle was still on for 2nd place. While Stefan Merriman celebrated his World Championship, Enduro 2 competitor Arno Villanova was celebrating his 23rd birthday in his own style. With the absence of the injured Alessandro Botturi, the Catalan rider took 3rd place on day 2 and moved up in the season standings. Before coming to Ceres, Villanova was 4th, 19 points behind Botturi. After Ceres, he lay 3rd, 17 points in front of the Italian. And for once, it wasn't Paul Edmondson aboard the 250 Honda who finished 2nd. On this day in Greece, it was another Honda rider, Valtteri Salonen, who took the place. It was the 3rd podium finish for the young Finn this season, for which he's already been rewarded with a new contract next season by his Honda HM team. All day long, Juha Salminen kept an eye on the special stage results set by Edmondson. but nothing was settled. Despite only a fourth place for the Briton, the Finn could still not clinch the title. He was just 6 points short of taking the Enduro 2 crown, so barring any disasters, this should be a formality for him in Germany. Second to Salminen in Greece was fellow Finn Valtteri Salonen. This meant that he entered the top 5 in the Enduro 2 class. In Enduro 3, several riders on the big machines committed some late season errors. Mika Ahola in fourth place was one of them, but he wasn't alone. Marko Tarkala took on some serious water in the point-to-point special. Sebastian Guillaume finished 7th, but not before stalling and losing a minute on a rather easy climb. In fact, only the holy trio of the class, Samouli Aro, David Knight and Ivan Cervantes, rode without any problems on day 2. The Spaniard took 3rd, 45 seconds behind the leader, while Knight assured himself of 2nd place and was ready to jump into the lead at any mistake committed by Samouli Aro. But Samouli, of course, didn't make any, and once again, it was he who won the day. It was his 10th victory in the 2004 championship, and, like his fellow Finn, Juha Salminen, Aro is well on his way to the world's title. Another title that was decided at Ceres was the
this year, because Stefan's won so easily this year, and yeah, the team's been fantastic, and yeah, I'm really happy to have the baby. It won't be long now, so.
So the first championship in the new look WEC went to Stefan Merriman, but in Enduro 1 the battle was still on for 2nd place. While Stefan Merriman celebrated his World Championship, Enduro 2 competitor Arno Villanova was celebrating his 23rd birthday in his own style. With the absence of the injured Alessandro Botturi, the Catalan rider took 3rd place on day 2 and moved up in the season standings. Before coming to Ceres, Villanova was 4th, 19 points behind Botturi. After Ceres, he lay 3rd, 17 points in front of the Italian. And for once, it wasn't Paul Edmondson aboard the 250 Honda who finished 2nd. On this day in Greece, it was another Honda rider, Valtteri Salonen, who took the place. It was the 3rd podium finish for the young Finn this season, for which he's already been rewarded with a new contract next season by his Honda HM team. All day long, Juha Salminen kept an eye on the special stage results set by Edmondson, but nothing was settled. Despite only a 4th place for the Briton, the Finn could still not clinch the title. He was just 6 points short of taking the Enduro 2 crown, so barring any disasters, this should be a formality for him in Germany. Second to Salminen in Greece was fellow Finn Valtteri Salonen. This meant that he entered the top 5 in the Enduro 2 class. In Enduro 3, several riders on the big machines committed some late season errors. Mika Ahola in 4th place was one of them, but he wasn't alone. Marko Tarkala took on some serious water in the point-to-point special. Sebastian Guillaume finished 7th, but not before stalling and losing a minute on a rather easy climb. In fact, only the holy trio of the class, Samouli Aro, David Knight and Ivan Cervantes, rode without any problems on day 2. The Spaniard took 3rd, 45 seconds behind the leader, while Knight assured himself of 2nd place and was ready to jump into the lead at any mistake committed by Samouli Aro. But Samouli, of course, didn't make any, and once again, it was he who won the day. It was his 10th victory in the 2004 championship, and, like his fellow Finn, Juha Salminen, Aro is well on his way to the world's title. Another title that was decided at Ceres was the
this year, because Stefan's won so easily this year, and yeah, the team's been fantastic, and yeah, I'm really happy to have the baby. It won't be long now, so.
So the first championship in the new look WEC went to Stefan Merriman. But in Enduro 1, the battle was still on for second place. While Stefan Merriman celebrated his World Championship, Enduro 2 competitor Arno Villanova was celebrating his 23rd birthday in his own style. With the absence of the injured Alessandro Botturi, the Catalan rider took third place on day 2 and moved up in the season standings. Before coming to Ceres, Villanova was fourth, 19 points behind Botturi. After Ceres, he lay third, 17 points in front of the Italian. And for once, it wasn't Paul Edmondson aboard the 250 Honda who finished second. On this day in Greece, it was another Honda rider, Valtteri Salonen, who took the place. It was the third podium finish for the young Finn this season, for which he's already been rewarded with a new contract next season by his Honda HMT. All day long, Juha Salminen kept an eye on the special stage results set by Edmondson, but nothing was settled. Despite only a fourth place for the Briton, the Finn could still not clinch the title. He was just 6 points short of taking the Enduro 2 crown, so barring any disasters, this should be a formality for him in Germany. Second to Salminen in Greece was fellow Finn Valtteri Salonen. This meant that he entered the top 5 in the Enduro 2 class. In Enduro 3, several riders on the big machines committed some late season errors. Mika Ahola in fourth place was one of them, but he wasn't alone. Marko Tarkala took on some serious water in the point-to-point special. Sebastian Guillaume finished 7th, but not before stalling and losing a minute on a rather easy climb. In fact, only the holy trio of the class, Samueli Aro, David Knight and Ivan Cervantes, rode without any problems on day 2. The Spaniard took third, 45 seconds behind the leader, while Knight assured himself of second place and was ready to jump into the lead at any mistake committed by Samueli Aro. But Samueli, of course, didn't make any, and once again, it was he who won the day. It was his 10th victory in the 2004 championship, and, like his fellow Finn Juha Salminen, Aro is well on his way to the world title. Another title that was decided at Ceres was the
this year, because Stefan's won so easily this year, and yeah, the team's been fantastic, and yeah, I'm really happy to have the baby. It won't be long now, so.
So the first championship in the new look WEC went to Stefan Merriman. But in Enduro 1, the battle was still on for second place. While Stefan Merriman celebrated his World Championship, Enduro 2 competitor Arno Villanova was celebrating his 23rd birthday in his own style. With the absence of the injured Alessandro Botturi, the Catalan rider took third place on day 2 and moved up in the season standings. Before coming to Ceres, Villanova was fourth, 19 points behind Botturi. After Ceres, he lay third, 17 points in front of the Italian. And for once, it wasn't Paul Edmondson aboard the 250 Honda who finished second. On this day in Greece, it was another Honda rider, Valtteri Salonen, who took the place. It was the third podium finish for the young Finn this season, for which he's already been rewarded with a new contract next season by his Honda HMT. All day long, Juha Salminen kept an eye on the special stage results set by Edmondson, but nothing was settled. Despite only a fourth place for the Briton, the Finn could still not clinch the title. He was just 6 points short of taking the Enduro 2 crown, so barring any disasters, this should be a formality for him in Germany. Second to Salminen in Greece was fellow Finn Valtteri Salonen. This meant that he entered the top 5 in the Enduro 2 class. In Enduro 3, several riders on the big machines committed some late season errors. Mika Ahola in 4th place was one of them, but he wasn't alone. Marko Tarkala took on some serious water in the point-to-point special. Sebastian Guillaume finished 7th, but not before stalling and losing a minute on a rather easy climb. In fact, only the holy trio of the class, Samouli Aro, David Knight and Ivan Cervantes, rode without any problems on day 2. The Spaniard took 3rd, 45 seconds behind the leader, while Knight assured himself of 2nd place and was ready to jump into the lead at any mistake committed by Samouli Aro. But Samouli, of course, didn't make any, and once again, it was he who won the day. It was his 10th victory in the 2004 championship, and, like his fellow Finn Juha Salminen, Aro is well on his way to the world's title. Another title that was decided at Ceres was the
this year, because Stefan's won so easily this year, and yeah, the team's been fantastic, and yeah, I'm really happy to have the baby. It won't be long now, so.
So the first championship in the new look WEC went to Stefan Merriman, but in Enduro 1 the battle was still on for 2nd place. While Stefan Merriman celebrated his World Championship, Enduro 2 competitor Arno Villanova was celebrating his 23rd birthday in his own style. With the absence of the injured Alessandro Botturi, the Catalan rider took 3rd place on day 2 and moved up in the season standings. Before coming to Ceres, Villanova was 4th, 19 points behind Botturi. After Ceres, he lay 3rd, 17 points in front of the Italian. And for once, it wasn't Paul Edmondson aboard the 250 Honda who finished 2nd. On this day in Greece, it was another Honda rider, Valtteri Salonen, who took the place. It was the 3rd podium finish for the young Finn this season, for which he's already been rewarded with a new contract next season by his Honda HM team. All day long, Juha Salminen kept an eye on the special stage results set by Edmondson, but nothing was settled. Despite only a 4th place for the Briton, the Finn could still not clinch the title. He was just 6 points short of taking the Enduro 2 crown, so barring any disasters, this should be a formality for him in Germany. Second to Salminen in Greece was fellow Finn Valtteri Salonen. This meant that he entered the top 5 in the Enduro 2 class. In Enduro 3, several riders on the big machines committed some late season errors. Mika Ahola in 4th place was one of them, but he wasn't alone. Marko Tarkala took on some serious water in the point-to-point special. Sebastian Guillaume finished 7th, but not before stalling and losing a minute on a rather easy climb. In fact, only the holy trio of the class, Samouli Aro, David Knight and Ivan Cervantes, rode without any problems on day 2. The Spaniard took 3rd, 45 seconds behind the leader, while Knight assured himself of 2nd place and was ready to jump into the lead at any mistake committed by Samouli Aro. But Samouli, of course, didn't make any, and once again, it was he who won the day. It was his 10th victory in the 2004 championship, and, like his fellow Finn Juha Salminen, Aro is well on his way to the world's title. Another title that was decided at Ceres was the this
year, because Stefan's won so easily this year, and yeah, the team's been fantastic, and yeah, I'm really happy to have the baby. It won't be long now, so.
So the first championship in the new look WEC went to Stefan Merriman. But in Enduro 1, the battle was still on for second place. While Stefan Merriman celebrated his World Championship, Enduro 2 competitor Arno Villanova was celebrating his 23rd birthday in his own style. With the absence of the injured Alessandro Botturi, the Catalan rider took third place on day 2 and moved up in the season standings. Before coming to Jerez, Villanova was fourth, 19 points behind Botturi. After Jerez, he lay third, 17 points in front of the Italian. And for once, it wasn't Paul Edmondson aboard the 250 Honda who finished second. On this day in Greece, it was another Honda rider, Valtteri Salonen, who took the place. It was the third podium finish for the young Finn this season, for which he's already been rewarded with a new contract next season by his Honda HMT. All day long, Juha Salminen kept an eye on the special stage results set by Edmondson, but nothing was settled. Despite only a fourth place for the Briton, the Finn could still not clinch the title. He was just 6 points short of taking the Enduro 2 crown, so barring any disasters, this should be a formality for him in Germany. Second to Salminen in Greece was fellow Finn Valtteri Salonen. This meant that he entered the top 5 in the Enduro 2 class. In Enduro 3, several riders on the big machines committed some late season errors. Mika Ahola in fourth place was one of them, but he wasn't alone. Marco Tarkala took on some serious water in the point-to-point special. Sebastian Guillaume finished seventh, but not before stalling and losing a minute on a rather easy climb. In fact, only the holy trio of the class, Samueli Aro, David Knight and Ivan Cervantes, rode without any problems on day 2. The Spaniard took third, 45 seconds behind the leader, while Knight assured himself of second place and was ready to jump into the lead at any mistake committed by Samueli Aro. But Samueli, of course, didn't make any, and once again, it was he who won the day. It was his 10th victory in the 2004 championship, and, like his fellow Finn Juha Salminen, Aro is well on his way to the world title. Another title that was decided at Jerez was the
this year, because Stefan's won so easily this year, and yeah, the team's been fantastic, and yeah, I'm really happy to have the baby. It won't be long now, so.
So the first championship in the new look WEC went to Stefan Merriman, but in Enduro 1 the battle was still on for second place. While Stefan Merriman celebrated his World Championship, Enduro 2 competitor Arno Villanova was celebrating his 23rd birthday in his own style. With the absence of the injured Alessandro Botturi, the Catalan rider took third place on day 2 and moved up in the season standings. Before coming to Jerez, Villanova was fourth, 19 points behind Botturi. After Jerez, he lay third, 17 points in front of the Italian. And for once, it wasn't Paul Edmondson aboard the 250 Honda who finished second. On this day in Greece, it was another Honda rider, Valtteri Salonen, who took the place. It was the third podium finish for the young Finn this season, for which he's already been rewarded with a new contract next season by his Honda HMT. All day long, Juha Salminen kept an eye on the special stage results set by Edmondson, but nothing was settled. Despite only a fourth place for the Briton, the Finn could still not clinch the title. He was just 6 points short of taking the Enduro 2 crown, so barring any disasters, this should be a formality for him in Germany. Second to Salminen in Greece was fellow Finn Valtteri Salonen. This meant that he entered the top 5 in the Enduro 2 class. In Enduro 3, several riders on the big machines committed some late-season errors. Mika Ahola in 4th place was one of them, but he wasn't alone. Marko Tarkala took on some serious water in the point-to-point special. Sebastian Guillaume finished 7th, but not before stalling and losing a minute on a rather easy climb. In fact, only the holy trio of the class, Samuel Aro, David Knight and Ivan Cervantes, rode without any problems on day 2. The Spaniard took 3rd, 45 seconds behind the leader, while Knight assured himself of 2nd place and was ready to jump into the lead at any mistake committed by Samuel Aro. But Samuel, of course, didn't make any, and once again, it was he who won the day. It was his 10th victory in the 2004 championship, and, like his fellow Finn Juha Salminen, Aro is well on his way to the world's title. Another title that was decided at Ceres was the
this year, because Stefan's won so easily this year, and yeah, the team's been fantastic, and yeah, I'm really happy to have the baby. It won't be long now, so.
So the first championship in the new look WEC went to Stefan Merriman, but in Enduro 1 the battle was still on for 2nd place. While Stefan Merriman celebrated his World Championship, Enduro 2 competitor Arno Villanova was celebrating his 20